Welcome in to another edition of Vikings on SI with Jonathan Harris. I'm Jonathan Harrison, joined alongside Will Ragatz, Joe Nelson, and Tony Liebert. Boys, we've got an exciting one to discuss. A big day yesterday for the Vikings, an ugly one for sure. Will, you wrote about it over on Vikings on SI. We've covered it all this morning as well. Plenty to discuss off of this one. So, Will, I'll start with you. Your general thoughts off of a disgusting win for the Vikings for sure. It wasn't the offensive performance scoring-wise that we would have wanted. Yardage and time of possession-wise certainly it was something to behold. But scoring-wise, not Sam Darnold's greatest day. Are there reasons for concern about this Vikings offense going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are after, you turn the ball over 3 times. Sam Darnold now 5 interceptions over the last 2 weeks. That was a weird game. I mean, I don't know that I've seen one quite like that. It was the first game since 2006 where a team scored no touchdowns, turned it over at least 3 times, and still managed to win. So you look at the box score stats, and yeah, like you said, the yardage, the time of possession, first downs, all these things. The Vikings should have blown that Jaguars team out. They just continually shot themselves in the foot when they got into Jaguars territory. They were in the red zone 5 times, and they had interceptions and settled for field goals. And so I think you can look at it both ways where, okay, they moved the ball overall. The defense got Blake Cashman back, looked a lot like it did early in the season, albeit against, backup quarterback in Mac Jones. So there's some positive signs there. TJ Hawkinson looks to be fully back. He was their leading receiver yesterday. But you can also look at it the other way and say, Sam Darnold's inability to take care of the football is a real legitimate concern for this Vikings team moving forward, because that's now 5 picks in the last 2 games, 3 of which have come in the end zone. It's just he continues to make these decisions and these inaccurate throws that are really hurting the Vikings. So we'll have to see if he can bounce back. They're not going to bench him, certainly, because Nick Mullins isn't a better option. We know about his struggles to take care of the football. Kevin O'Connell gave Darnold a vote of confidence after the game, but it really, I've said it all along this season, the talent is there up and down the roster on this team, but Darnold is going to be the one who determines the ceiling. If he's able to play like he did at times earlier in the season, this team can be really good. If he continues to revert back into the old Darnold and make these just mind-boggling mistakes and throws, the Vikings might have a limited ceiling.
Yeah, and you know what? I was looking at this yesterday and watching Darnold make mistake after mistake after mistake, and then big time throw after big time throw after big time throw. It was so up and down, and it was actually a 60-minute version of what we saw the previous week. It wasn't pretty by any means, but like we talked about, guys, I still think the ceiling for this team is higher, and the floor is lower with Sam Darnold than it would be with Kirk Cousins, just because of, the escapability, the ability to extend a play, the ability to fire a dart into a very tight window. And it's the aggressiveness that's getting him into trouble and just some misplaced balls. That pass he threw to Justin Jefferson for that first interception, or was it the second? I can't remember, deflected up in the air. He had no room anywhere to go with that football, and he tried to squeeze it in like he was Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers in his prime, and it just didn't work. But if you can get him on a good day in the playoffs and he's making those throws and they're not going the other way, the ceiling is very high. Matthew Collar, our good friend from Purple Insider, who writes a lot of content for Vikings on SI, he put it really well this morning that it's like you've got this roster of 53 guys who you could match up with basically any team in the NFL and feel really good about it. But your QB1 and the carelessness is what might take you down when it matters the most. The ceiling is high. The floor is very low in any game. If he did something like he did yesterday against Detroit or San Francisco or Green Bay or Philadelphia or the Washington Commanders, man, it's not a 12-7 game. It's probably 30-6, and the Vikings are losing. So that it really could have gone a lot worse than it did. You just happened to be playing Mac Jones and one of the worst offenses in the world, and they got away with it. So they're 7-2, still in the mix, but but they've got a lot to figure out to make Sam Darnold as comfortable as possible so he does not make those gigantic mistakes going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of agree with what both of you guys have said. I think the ceiling's still there for this team, but what I guess question is if they can put Sam Darnold specifically, if he can put 3 or 4 good games together in a row. I mean, he did show it early in the year, but that's not in the playoffs. And the last few weeks have kind of raised, I guess, questions in that area for me, is if that is still there. I think this team has all the pieces to compete and beat just about anyone in the NFL. I think this season has shown the most parity we've seen in a while. The Chiefs are undefeated, and we all know they're the Chiefs, but they have looked very vulnerable, I think. So I think the ceiling's still there, like what you guys have said, but a game like that just raises concerns if how often they're going to hit that ceiling.
Yeah, on Darnold, I tweeted during the game, and I will just say my in-game tweets sometimes they shouldn't be a reflection of my opinions because they're emotional and we're watching things happen live. And after the third interception, I was like, should they consider benching Darnold and putting Mullins in, because it seemed to be kind of mind-boggling decision after mind-boggling decision. In the moment, I was thinking like, maybe he just doesn't have it for this game, and they really need to find a way to win this game to keep pace with Detroit in the NFC North. And maybe his confidence is gone, and then throwing Mullins out there would change things up. But obviously, that would come with ramifications as well. And Kevin O'Connell said after it was something they were never considering. Watching the game back, I think Darnold was he was pretty solid outside of those mistakes. Like Joe said, he really gives you some pocket movement and the ability to get out and scramble for some yards. He was throwing the ball pretty accurately for the most part. I mean, it doesn't negate the interceptions, obviously. But to look at it kind of charitably from Darnold's perspective, on the first one, you could argue Jefferson's got to be more physical and get inside of the cornerback Tyson Campbell on that play. And it was also just a good play by Campbell. He played really physical within that 5-yard limit where you're able to do so legally. I don't necessarily hate Darnold trying to trust the best receiver in the world there. Obviously, he wasn't open. But the second one, it was a miscommunication sort of, where it looked like Darnold thought Jefferson was going to come directly back to the ball from the back of the end zone. Jefferson went to the side. And then, of course, if you watch the replay of that one, it looked like it probably should have been overturned. So they just weren't on the same page a few times in this game. I still think, like we've said, the ceiling is there with Darnold because of the arm talent and the mobility, and he has to make better decisions. And Kevin O'Connell, this is a real test of Kevin O'Connell's coaching genius and his ability to work with these quarterbacks. He's got to help Darnold find the answers and eliminate some of these mistakes. But also, you don't want to just make him a check down machine and put a limit on what he's doing in terms of being aggressive and ripping the ball downfield. The Jaguars played a ton of the shell with 2 high safeties, and they were trying to keep everything in front of them. And I think they actually deserve some credit for the way that they approach this Vikings offense. So now it's about, can O'Connell and Darnold and everybody else on this offense make adjustments and find ways to beat those looks without putting the ball in harm's way like they did.
Guys, I'll throw this in there too. Jacksonville does deserve a lot of credit because that's the most physical defense I've seen the Vikings play all season. They were hitting everybody hard. Every tackle was finished. How many times did we see a Vikings player just get picked up by Cam Akers, TJ Hawkinson? It might have happened to Justin Jefferson once. They were getting picked up and thrown to the ground. The hit Aaron Jones took, where it was a rib injury or whatever they ended up calling that, and he came back in the game late. He got absolutely smashed. He was going full speed on a handoff out of the backfield, and it was like, bam, brick wall. And those guys were hitting hard. The interceptions, the coverage was good. Darnold didn't have to be off by much, and they took advantage of it. Now, yeah, forcing throws into tight windows is going to get you into trouble if you do it too many times, especially when you're deep into enemy territory, and you'll take any points you can get. But that Jacksonville defense was mean, man. Those guys can bring it. And that actually explains a lot about why they've been in so many close games this season. It's not because Trevor Lawrence is leading comebacks. It's not because Mac Jones is, in there, and they're probably going to have more blowout losses with Jones going forward if Lawrence is unhealthy. But that defense is nothing to scoff at.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Will, you mentioned Kevin O'Connell needing to help out Sam Darnold. How much of what we saw yesterday, the struggles in the red zone and everything, how much should we lay? I know there's a lot of blame going to Sam Darnold for throwing those picks, but how much should we lay at the feet of Kevin O'Connell and his play calling? I know that's been of question since he got here. The lack of a true consistent running game has always been there with these Vikings. Aaron Jones seems to have fixed that a little bit, but still, there's moments where, especially on 3rd and 1, when you're just looking to seal out the game, you instead of just make the easy run, you go for a pass, trying to get a break open play. How much of this should fall at the feet of Kevin O'Connell at this point?
Yeah, I don't want to say that there should be a ton of blame on Kevin O'Connell, but it has been kind of a trend where the execution and the play calling, or some combination of both, in the red zone just has left something to be desired. And there's been times where the Vikings have looked really good under O'Connell in those areas. But this season, there was that reverse to Naylor yesterday that lost 7 yards. And it's like, all right, I don't know if that was the time for that. And then, the next play, there was a pass interference flag that got picked up, and Vikings had to settle for another field goal. Like you said, there was the 3rd and 1 where they'd been running the ball well. And then O'Connell said they just didn't block that play right because Trayvon Walker really just ran by Josh Oliver and got to Darnold pretty instantly. They were trying to do something else and play off the Jaguars' aggressive tendencies and hopefully hit some sort of kind of walk-off touchdown to really blow the game open or seal it. But, it just, for whatever reason, it hasn't really been good enough in that area. And there's been other things like Cam Robinson gets an illegal formation call because he's not lined up on the line of scrimmage that negates Jordan Addison converting a 3rd down inside the 5-yard line. And just little things like that. Yesterday, it seemed like everything that kind of could go wrong in the red zone area, even the fringe red zone when they got down to the 30 or so, it just went wrong. And they've got to figure it out, whether it's continuing to run the football more with Aaron Jones, who only has 2 rushing touchdowns all year, I believe. They've struggled to get him in when they get down low in those situations. Darnold's been throwing touchdowns for most of the year, but wasn't able to do any of that against the Jaguars. So I do think it falls on everybody involved. Sam Darnold for the decision-making and the throws, and the receivers maybe not being on the same page, offensive linemen, pre-snap penalties, all these things. And Kevin O'Connell is at the head of all that as the coach and the offensive leader of this team. So they have to adjust, and they got to be better to be able to punch it in for touchdowns when they get down there.
Yeah, I don't think they can play like that against a good team and get away with it. But I will say this. The thing about Kevin O'Connell compared to Mike Zimmer in the past, and I don't want to do revisionist history here, but the telltale signs of a good coach with any kind of roster is that you can find ways to overcome. And the Vikings do deserve a lot of credit for actually winning that game. They had no business winning that game when you turn it over 3 times in the red zone or however many times it was. It was just mistake after mistake after mistake, but they have found ways to win. And the trauma brain, as Minnesota sports fans, as we know, is that we think it's going to go bad every time we face a backup quarterback. Every time the Vikings have a game like that, you're never going to come out on top with a victory. This was not like a day where you're scrambling to play catch up to keep it within 1 score and hope to score some points at the end of the game, kind of like it was so many times in years past. This was a game where Jacksonville had every chance to win, but the defense stood very, very tall. The part that's confusing, though, and will mess with our minds, is that it was Mac Jones, right? So is the defense really as good as it's looked the last 2 weeks? They did get Blake Cashman back yesterday. Ivan Pace Jr. was healthy. Everybody's healthy on defense right now, and they looked really good and really similar to how they played against really good teams in the first 5 weeks of the season when they started 5-0. but is it a reality? Is it a product of the collection of the whole, or is it actually facing Joe Flacco and Mac Jones in back-to-back weeks that's making them look better than they are? That's the mind tease that's happening with me right now, and I think a lot of Vikings fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think through 10 weeks, we've just kind of seen what the ceiling of the team is and what the floor of the team is. And with Sam Darnold, that's kind of what you're going to get. He's not, I think we figured out he's not a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, and he's at his best, he might be in that 12 to 15 range, but that's kind of what you get with a player of his caliber. And in sports culture, sometimes, especially in America, we want to just blame everything on the coach and say, oh, this is the coach's fault. And we like to, as fans and people covering sports, sometimes people like to call for people's jobs and say, oh, this needs to be changed or that needs to be changed. I think there's some times you just need to be like, they have to be better. And the fact that they still won that game for how poorly they played, I think shows how good of a culture they have with the franchise. And that's something that's going to continue in these games. And those are the games that good football teams win. They learn how to win ugly. And I think it's going to pay off later in the season when they get in those bigger moments. And this was a game I guess they needed to have, like Will said.
Yeah, defensively, I think it was encouraging. And I know it was against Mac Jones. And the Jaguars offense did not look very good. But you saw for the first time since the London game what they look like when they're fully healthy with Blake Cashman out there. And Cashman, I mean, you saw him. He makes a very, very big difference when he's there with what he's able to do against the run, what he's able to do in coverage. He had a sack of Mac Jones. He had another sack that was called back because he accidentally grabbed his face mask. So, yeah, having Cashman in there, which then puts Ivan Pace in a role that's better for him where he's playing – I don't know how many snaps he played yesterday. I'm guessing it was like 30, 40, something like that. Well, actually, probably less because the Jaguars only ran like 40 total plays. But where he's not the every down guy who has to do the Cashman role, he's just doing his role, and he got a sack in this game. And he's really good coming downhill against the run. They have lots of pieces on that side of the ball. And we saw it. Byron Murphy had an interception for the third straight week. Cam Bynum had another interception. They just really shut down everything that the Jaguars were trying to do to get back in the game or extend the lead when they were up. And I think that's encouraging, even if it's against a bad offense. Now, they might not get tested for a bit because next week it's the Titans and Will Levis, who didn't look particularly good in his return against the Chargers yesterday. But once they get into some of these games later this season, well, and then it's the Bears after that who looked absolutely disastrous.
Yeah, they're
in
cooked,
their game
man.
against.
They're done.
Yeah, I think the Patriots had 9 sacks in that game, so the Vikings got to be licking their chops defensively for Will Levis and Caleb Williams the next 2 weeks. But then after that, you're going to face some tests with Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. They still have to play the Packers, the Seahawks, the Lions at the end of this season. So I think they'll have a couple more weeks here to really potentially feast on some bad offenses. But if that can help you grow confident and hit your stride, and you don't want to become overconfident, obviously, but I think this defense, if they stay healthy, they're going to have the Vikings in every game all year long.
So what's the real version of this Vikings team? It's clearly not the version we saw yesterday that struggled offensively, that dominated defensively, and it's clearly not the team that we saw earlier in the season that was seemingly blowing the doors off of opponents. What is the actual version? What's the real version of this 2024 Vikings team, Will?
It's somewhere in the middle of everything we've seen through their 9-week resume. I mean, this is a 7-2 football team in the NFL right now, which is always impressive. It's also not a 7-2 like 2022 Vikings team where you knew they were just kind of riding on some lucky wave with one score win after one score win. Granted, it's looked a little bit more like that the last few weeks with a couple one-score wins over bad teams, couple losses, but they're still capable of doing what they did earlier this season when they put it all together on both sides of the ball of taking it to good teams like they did against the Texans and the Packers and the 49ers. And so I think there's somewhere, some combination of everything we've seen so far where if it's all going well and they're firing on all cylinders, they're hard to beat because Sam Darnold has the arm talent to make the throws and he has the mobility to get out of the pocket. The weapons are, I mean, arguably unmatched across the league. Justin Jefferson finally had a quiet game yesterday, but you look at one through 4. I mean, you can even throw Jalen Naylor or Josh Oliver in there. Like the weapons are legit. The coaching staff is high class, high quality. The defense, when they're playing well and they've maybe fixed some of the things that were giving them issues against the really good Lions and Rams offenses, they're as good as any defense in the league. So the ceiling, like we've said, is still there, but there's also a floor that we've seen on both sides of the ball this season, where if Darnold's turning the ball over, if the interior offensive line is leaky, if the defense is struggling to kind of bleeding yardage, like it's not always going to be smooth, but we also know that they do have the pieces to be really good. So it's just going to come down to coaching and execution these final 8 weeks. And they're going to be in the playoffs. It'd be cool if they could find a way to catch the Lions, but they won't lose. They're down 16 at half in Houston, and Goff throws 5 picks, and they still find a way to win. So it's going to be tough to win that division and get the home field advantage in the playoffs. But I'm rather confident that they're going to be in the playoffs. And then, you know what, if you give yourself a chance with Darnold and with this defense to show up and potentially make a run.
Joe, what's your confidence level that this team can win a game or maybe 2 in the playoffs? Should they get there? I mean, they're at 7-2, as Will said. They've got a very good chance of getting there. What's your confidence level that they could win a game in the playoffs?
It's pretty high, actually. I mean, I still think if you look at the NFC as a whole, it's Detroit on top by what feels like miles right now. And then you've got a collection of teams that are pretty good right behind them. And I would put the Vikings, the Eagles, the Commanders, the Packers, and maybe a healthy 49ers team right there. And then you have, I would say, Arizona and Atlanta kind of on the outside looking in. Even though they're division leaders right now, I don't think they're quite as good. Well, we're going to find out when they play them back-to-back week in the first 8 days of December. Minnesota does, and I think both of them are here in Minneapolis. But I would feel pretty good about it right now. If you enter the playoffs, Detroit's the 1 seed. I think Philly's the 2. The Vikings would end up being the 5 seed as the first wild card, and they would be going to Arizona or Atlanta. I think right now, technically, they'd be going to Arizona because Atlanta has that tiebreaker for whatever reason. So, yeah, you could definitely win at Arizona. I think it would be a tough win. It's all about Sam Darnold. It's crazy. It's the most boring theme you could possibly think of because we've had it this way all season long, but nothing's changed. They beat Jacksonville by 20 or 30 points yesterday if Sam Darnold doesn't make Sam Darnold decisions, right? I mean, they literally do win by that many points. You go back to so many games this season, and the blowout factor has been there in like 70 or 80% of the time of the weeks this season for the Vikings. Even that Packers game, 31-29 was the final score, I believe. If that bad Xavier McKinney interception where he was clearly out of bounds isn't upheld via replay, Minnesota's down inside the 20-yard line on second down and up 28-0, and they likely add at least 3 points there, and they blow the doors off the Packers at Lambeau Field. Instead, that interception proved to be a bit of a momentum and game changer, and then Jordan Love got hot for a couple of drives in a row, and then you had a weird muffed punt and then a weird Sam Darnold blindside fumble. The game can change in a hurry, but this team has shown so many times the ability to absolutely dominate and dismantle opponents. So if Sam Darnold doesn't screw things up, they're a team that can go very far in the playoffs. Can they get through Detroit? I don't know. I don't know if anybody can get through Detroit. If Jared Goff can go 5 interceptions in a game and they still come back in the fourth quarter and beat a team on the road, a team as good as Houston on the road, man, that should serve as a big-time warning for the rest of the NFL. That's the best team in the NFL, Detroit. I don't care if the Chiefs are undefeated. I don't care how hot the Bills are. I don't care how hot the Eagles are. Detroit, man, that thing, they've got it cooking. They are the real deal Holyfield and the best pound-for-pound team in the league.
I mean, I would totally agree with what Joe said. After watching the game on Sunday, I kind of want to say that I'm not confident in the Vikings winning a game in the playoffs. But, I mean, you look at the NFC, and it's just hard to really be that confident in anyone other than the Lions.
Yeah.
So, like, for that aspect, like the Commanders or Eagles have looked really good, but the Vikings at their best, I would go into that game thinking they have just as good of a chance of winning as anyone. And the Lions, obviously, it's really easy to trust them right now. And I kind of agree with Joe. I do think they're the best team in the NFL right now. But it's just the NFC as a whole and the NFL as a whole right now is very weird with just quarterback play all over the league. And it just seems like anyone can almost beat anyone at any time except for maybe the Lions and Chiefs. But for that aspect, I think the Vikings have all the pieces, coaching staff, all these weapons to if you get a good Sam Darnold game, you can beat just about anyone in the NFL. And I get it, like Joe said, it just kind of comes down to that.
The NFC playoff race is going to be fun this second half of the season, and that's why it's really important that the Vikings were able to win against the Jaguars and win against the Colts, no matter how despicably ugly their first halves were in those games. They're keeping pace at 7-2 here, where they'll have a shot if they can keep winning at setting it up for a big game in Week 18 against the Lions to potentially be the 1 seed in the NFC. And the Vikings have a lot of work to do to be in that mix. But I mean, you look at it right now: Detroit, Philly, Atlanta, Arizona, Minnesota, Washington, Green Bay. Like, these are all teams that you can talk yourself into being pretty good and being in the mix and being able to make a run. And then on the outside of it, you've got San Francisco, who I thought was the best team in the NFC coming into the season. They're in the 8th spot right now. 9 spots the LA Rams, who play tonight against the Dolphins at the time we're recording this. And we've seen firsthand, watching the Vikings play them, what that team can look like when they're healthy on offense. Like, the 49ers and Rams have been in Super Bowls and NFC title games recently. They're the 8 and the 9 right now. I don't think anybody after that, Seattle, Tampa Bay, they're probably too hurt. But, I mean, there's 9 teams fighting real hard for what's going to be 7 spots and the seeding and positioning. And, Arizona and Atlanta get a little bit of a boost by just the nature of – well, I suppose Atlanta gets a boost by the nature of their division. Arizona right now does, but – San Francisco is going to be on their heels pretty hard, and potentially the Rams as well. It's going to be fun. The Vikings 7-2 right now. It is absolutely imperative that you get to 9-2, no matter how you do it. If you blow out the Titans and/or the Bears, which I think they're fully capable of, that'd be great. If you squeak out 2 more ugly ones, that works too, because you got to keep pace in this thing. Because it would just be so huge if the Lions could slip up once or twice here or there. I haven't looked at their schedule.
I'll tell you,
the Vikings would, if the Vikings can get that win the NFC North and get that home playoff game, that would be huge. Also, before you say it, just man, the Texans got to be kicking themselves after that one. There was that CJ Stroud interception where Tank Dell was open for like 3 business days, and when he finally threw it, Carlton Davis was able to intercept it. And then there was a missed field goal by the Texans and a missed call by the refs on what should have been a pass interference against the Lions that would have extended a drive. That was a tough one for Houston. The refs may be a factor, but they also blew a lot of opportunities when you're up, when you don't score a single point in the second half.
Yeah, Detroit's schedule. I mean, they're 8-1 right now. They host Jacksonville this week. I think they're favored by 13.5 points. They're 9-1, and then they go to the Colts. They're 10-1.
Okay.
Then they host the Bears on Thanksgiving. They're 11-1. But their final 5 games actually, are pretty darn tough. They host the Packers. They host the Bills. I wish both of those were on the road, but they're not. And then they have to go to Chicago. And by the time that game happens, it'll be 3 days before Christmas. Matt Eberflus has got to be fired by then. And maybe Chicago will have a little juice, right? You never know. And it's at Soldier Field. But then they have a Monday nighter in Week 17 against the 49ers, and that's in the Bay Area before the Week 18 game against the Vikings. So there's opportunities for the Lions to slip up, but not for the next few weeks.
Yeah, so the Vikings are going to have to hang around to give themselves a chance here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Will, while you mentioned the playoff race in the NFC is going to be fun, what wasn't fun was what happened Saturday for the Gophers. Tony, break this down for us. The Gophers somehow go in against Rutgers on a 4-game winning streak, a Rutgers team that was on a 4-game losing streak, and find a way to flip that around. Gophers losing 26-19. Ethan Kaliakmanis, the former Gophers quarterback, throwing 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 240 yards against a Gophers defense that has generally been pretty good against the pass this season. Just couldn't find their way to stop him on Saturday, and then couldn't find a way to get going offensively on Saturday, Tony.
Yeah, so that was the third time since 2019 that the Gophers had a 4-game winning streak, and every time they've lost their chance at a 5th win in a row. And I think everyone just kind of overlooked Rutgers a little bit. I was kind of, I guess, I don't know if shock's the right word, but a little surprised at the reaction from Gophers fans after the loss. I think a lot of people just assumed that Rutgers was terrible, which has just not been the case this year. They started out well with wins against Virginia Tech and Washington, and they flirted with the top 25. And then they had a lot of injuries and really struggled in their 4-game losing streak. But Greg Schiano's proven to be a really good head coach, and they just came into that game more prepared than the Gophers. It seemed like the Gophers just kind of were expecting Rutgers to not play well. Early in the game, it seemed like they went with the game plan of trying to let Ethan Kaliakmanis beat them, and they were playing pretty soft in coverage, and he kind of had every opportunity to dice up their secondary, and he did in the first half. The defense in the second half flipped it around, had a really solid second half, and both of their touchdowns were on short field, so there's not much you can do with that, but overall, the Gophers just got out-executed. I don't think it's in a long-term outlook of the season. It's an interesting thing because they were projected to win 4.5, 5.5 games this year. So in my opinion, they already have exceeded expectations kind of for that aspect that it's the third time in a row now they weren't able to get to the 5-game winning streak. I can see why fans are upset. But yeah, they just lost a Big Ten game on the road. It's hard to win conference games on the road, and I think we saw that on Saturday.
It wasn't hard for Wisconsin to go into Piscataway and run for 309 yards against Rutgers. I mean, I don't understand what happened. I think you have a very fair point, Tony. If you look at this from the linear perspective of, well, the season projections weren't that high. They've already become bowl eligible. It's a successful season in that regard. I look at it a little bit differently because when they went out and got Max Brosmer in the transfer portal, there were a lot of people saying this guy's got NFL traits. He's really intelligent. He's a smart quarterback, and he's going to open things up, and they're going to start throwing the ball more. Well, they've done that outside of the first couple of weeks, and they threw it for 45 times on Saturday against Rutgers. But for some reason, the running game disappeared, and that is supposed to be a strength of this team. When you look back at the box score and you see Darius Taylor, who's supposed to be a stud running back, go for 10 carries and 28 yards, and he had a long of 18. I mean, that's 9 carries for 10 yards the rest of the day. What is that? The Gophers averaged 1.8 yards per carry against a Rutgers team that gave up 309 to Tawi Walker and Wisconsin 3 weeks or 4 weeks earlier. Woody Marks averaged like 7 yards per carry for USC a couple of weeks ago. USC as a team averaged like 6 yards per carry. I don't understand what happened, but it wasn't good. Minnesota was absolutely supposed to go into Rutgers and win that game. The bar changed when you win 4 games in a row. And when you look at things in a week-by-week perspective, Gophers should have beat North Carolina. They kind of got robbed at Michigan after that disastrous start. And then the life-changing halftime that they've all talked about led them to a big comeback. And then the controversial offsides call on the onside kick cost them a chance to tie or win the game with like a minute 45 left. You take away those 2 losses and you can legitimately say the Gophers should be and could be 8-1 entering that game against Rutgers when Rutgers was reeling I know reality says they were 6-3, but reality also says Rutgers was still reeling. And they didn't have Kyle Monungai, who was the nation's 11th leading rusher. They come in and they running the ball down Minnesota's throat, and then Minnesota can't return the favor, and they can't finish drives. Dragan Ketchits misses an extra point. They don't go for 2 on a very obvious situational moment in the second half. There are a lot of things that were baffling about this game, and none of them as much as the final result. You got beat by the guy that you couldn't win with, Ethan Kaliakmanis. It's a very sad reality. And I remember earlier in the season, I was joking around. I was like, that's a fireable loss. I didn't think it was possible at that point. But here we are today talking about Ethan Kaliakmanis beating the Gophers and looking like Dan Marino while doing it. I mean, God, what happened? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I am optimistic yet because, Tony, you did a story on Gophers on SI, and you're like, yep, the Gophers are still getting, projected into bowl games against the likes of LSU and West Virginia and Louisville and Syracuse. Some of those are exciting. I don't want to see PJ Fleck covered in mayo at the Duke Mayo Bowl, but I would love to see some of those other games. But that's an inexcusable loss, if you ask me. If you want to set the narrative for your program that you're on the up and up, you got to win that game. That's just not good enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I guess I'll just push back on a little bit. I think the narrative with Ethan Kaliakmanis just got shifted so far that people think that he shouldn't even be starting in like the MAC, and he's more like a Missouri Valley quarterback, which I just don't think is true. He played well against USC last week. He played well in this game. He's played well a lot of times. He's going to continue to play well sometimes. He's just erratic. Kind of like Sam Darnold. The good is really good and the bad is really bad. And he had the good on Saturday. And I again, pretending like Rutgers is the worst team in the Big Ten, I think is also a little unfair. I think they are a quality program right now, and they've competed against other quality programs this season against Washington and Virginia Tech. But I do think it's really fair to be upset with the running game and the offensive line specifically. I had a lot higher hopes for that unit as a whole this year. Obviously, preseason All-American Ariante Ursary might be a first-round pick. When you have a guy like that on your offensive line, when you're a program like Minnesota, that's supposed to elevate the whole unit, and it just hasn't. They played really well 2 weeks ago against Illinois with their starting left guard Tyler Cooper out, shifted Quinn Carroll back inside. Freshman Phillip Daniels made his first career start, but they were just flat out bad against Rutgers. I am defending it a little bit, but that's a team that should not be getting 4 sacks on you. You should not be averaging 2.8 yards a rush. Like, that's inexcusable, and that is an issue. But they just got beat by a team that played better, and it's not – there were people that were comparing that to some of the worst losses that PJ Fleck's had, and in my opinion, it wasn't. There were clearly a lot of emotions going into that game. It was on the road. Rutgers had an extra week to prepare. I personally just think everyone as a whole, the fans, the players, the team, even us covering the game, overlooked Rutgers a little bit. And I think that's a team that could have a solid finish to the year, and they could be 7-5 maybe. And you look, they were kind of a good team. They had some good wins this year. And I don't think it's that inexcusable as people are making it seem, but it obviously wasn't a good performance.
Yeah, I would say I'm kind of in the middle between the two of you guys, where I think, it wasn't a good loss. There were a lot of frustrating elements about it when you consider Gophers had won 4 in a row, Rutgers had lost 4 in a row. Very, very winnable game, even being a Big Ten road game. And like Joe said, I mean, this season could look a lot different. There's a few plays here and there where they'd beat North Carolina on a very makeable kick, and maybe they get the onside kick correctly ruled against Michigan, and maybe they find a way to win this game. I mean, you could be talking about, you can do what ifs for any team, but you could theoretically be talking about a 9-1 team and a really, really exciting, interesting season. Then again, you could say maybe things could have gone the other way against USC or UCLA or Illinois, whatever the case may be. I think overall, 30,000 foot view, they're 6-4. People probably didn't think they were going to be at this point coming into the season. And You got a bye week now, but you have 2 opportunities to end the season to, I think, really close it on a high note. If you can beat Penn State at home, a top 10 Penn State team, and storm the field and all that, that would be a real highlight of the season. And even if you don't win that, if you can then the following week go to Madison and win the Axe game, beat your rivals on the road, they can win either one of those 2. I think you look at it as a really successful season. Maybe that gets you into a solid bowl. You got a chance for an 8th win. But if they lose both of those and then maybe lose a bowl game and you're like 6-7, you're like, the season had a lot of promise, but ended up being kind of mediocre. So these last 2 weeks, they've got opportunities to change the narrative and really build some good momentum going into next year.
But that's the question coming off this one. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I was going to say, I hope they finish strong this year because, next year is going to be really interesting. And not to jump too far into the future, but your quarterback's gone. Your top 2 wide receivers are gone in Daniel Jackson and Elijah Spencer. You lose both your tackles, Arianta Ursary and Quinn Carroll. I mean, you're losing some pieces here. You lose John Joyner. You lose Danny Strigo. You lose Cody Lindenberg.
Ethan
Robinson's
transfers.
not coming back. It's the age of college sports where there's going to be a lot of turnover no matter what. But a lot of your key players are done. They're running out of eligibility. So Drake Lindsay, I hope that Arkansas Gatorade Player of the Year value as a recruit who's a freshman on this roster right now lives up to the hype because he might have to do it by himself next year.
Yeah, it just I think the North Carolina loss was more inexcusable than this one. Max Johnson's performance before he got hurt in that game was legitimately one of the worst quarterback games I think I've watched all year. And that was a much more frustrating loss to me. That seemed like just a huge missed opportunity. I think Rutgers would beat North Carolina pretty comfortably, in my opinion. But yeah, and I mean, you look at next year, you mentioned all those guys, but you do probably get Coy Parrish back. You do probably get Darius Taylor back. You've seen some of these other wide receivers emerge. Christian Drivers had moments this year. You're seeing some of the young guys on the offensive line get some play. I think PJ Fleck kind of realizes that, and he's recruited well in the transfer portal last year. There's no reason he can't do it again this year. The team, I think, exceeded expectations, and there's still that momentum building. Like Will mentioned, I think if you pick up win against Penn State or Wisconsin, I think the season's a huge success. If you lose both those, lose the bowl game, I think you have every right to be a little frustrated because it has kind of become PJ Fleck's specialty since 2019 to at the end of the year, you're looking back at the season and you're like, man, if there was just a few other bounces there, you could have just had a completely different year. And I think there's every right to be frustrated at that. But I do think there's just a little overreaction to this game.
Well, if you look at every single game as a 1-0 or 0-1, you're not allowed to look back at the season as a whole. And that's PJ Fleck's mantra, right? He needs to start focusing on things as a whole and realize the moment is bigger than that week. I get it. It's nice for your coaching and your philosophy and keeping kids on track and whatnot. Come on, man.
You're preaching to the choir a little bit, Joe.
Yeah.
But it's just at the start of the year, it's just when you lose that North Carolina game, my expectations were so low, and they were low coming into the year. And there were just so many issues in that game that they have corrected. And I don't want to like throw it all away just because they lost to Rutgers. Like they built up so much good stuff in that 4-game winning streak, and it did flip at halftime of that Michigan game. That I just think it's a little overreaction to just be like, oh, season's over, you lost to Rutgers. Like, they weren't going to play in the Big Ten championship. So in the grand scheme of things, like if you do look at a 30,000-foot view, this game 6 months from now could mean very little in the grand scheme.
Yeah. I mean, if they beat Penn State, they're going to get a really good bowl game. We have to look at it that way. Hey, it could be worse. You could be Iowa and lose to the UCLA Bruins when you have a great shot to do some damage and win a lot of games and even threaten a spot in the college football playoff if everything goes right. But that's dead now.
So what should be the expectations for these final two games? You guys have mentioned them a couple times now. Penn State at home, and then you go to Wisconsin to take on the 5-4 Badgers. Tough games in their own right for very different reasons. What are your guys' expectations to finish the season?
Let me go real quick, and I won't waste much time. But just stay competitive against Penn State. The outcome, win or loss, nobody's going to be upset if you lose to a top 5, 6 team in the country, right? Just don't get your doors blown off. And then you have to beat Wisconsin. Braden Locke is literally the bad Sam Darnold all of the time. So you have one of the top pass defenses in the country. You can't lose to Braden Locke. No disrespect to what they got going over there at Camp Randall and Madison, but he ain't it, man. He is not it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Wisconsin's honestly a borderline must win, especially after their performance last year in that game. And my opinion on the Penn State game really hasn't changed. I think the Gophers are going to be a live underdog in that game. I think James Franklin could maybe be getting a little flashbacks to that 2019 season when the Gophers did upset them at home. And Penn State has just looked really vulnerable all year. They should have lost on the road against USC. They had a close game against Bowling Green. Obviously, they probably should have beat Ohio State, but like they're a talented team. And I think the Gophers are going to be in that game. I honestly would be pretty surprised that was a blowout. I think it just plays well for the Gophers. They get an extra week to prepare. They get them at home. Just got announced at a 2:30 kickoff. That'll be on CBS prime time. I think it'll be a good atmosphere. And there might be a little less excitement now that they lost that Rutgers game. But I think they'll be alive in that game. And if you win that, then you could finish the year 8-4 and have 3 ranked wins. Like, that's a great season.
Yeah, for sure.
Will, expectations?
Oh, yeah, my bad.
None. He has none.
No, I think
They're
they
so
covered
low.
it. I think they covered it pretty well. I mentioned it a little bit. If you win either of those games, I think you look at the season pretty big success. And so those will be both kind of exciting opportunities. Penn State will be tough, but you get them at home. Badgers, always tough to win that game on the road, but I mean, football-wise, you'd like to think they have a pretty good chance. So, yeah, we'll see.
Looking forward to it. Go read all their work over at Vikings, Twins, Timberwolves, Gophers, and Badgers on SI, covering it all for you over on Bring Me the Sports. For the YouTube watchers and listeners, be sure to hit subscribe. It does help us get found. Also notifies you every time we post a new video over here on the channel. We'll talk to you tomorrow with another topic across Minnesota sports. We'll talk to you then.